I'm Ben Irvine, and I am the voice of the Scottish Socialist Party in Inverclyde. Last time we spoke, I was still recovering from the disappointment of the referendum result. But as the old saying goes, when one door closes, another one opens. That particular door to independence might have been closed on us, and certainly the Unionists will have you believe that it will remain closed. Unfortunately for the Unionists, and fortunately for the more progressive elements of our society, democracy has been well and truly awakened in Scotland in the aftermath of the referendum. The SNP, the Greens, and more importantly for us, the Scottish Socialist Party, now have more new members than we know what to do with. This surge in support for the Yes parties, the parties that put the Scottish people first, has ensured that independence will stay firmly on the political landscape. So what now for the Scottish Socialist Party? Well, if the current rate of growth in membership continues, we will soon challenge Scottish New Labour in terms of party members. Now, given that since 2008 Scottish New Labour have consistently refused to publish details of their membership, it's difficult to know exactly where we stand relative to them. What we do know, however, is that Scottish New Labour are hemorrhaging members, while we are officially the fastest growing socialist party in Europe. So this is not a time to mourn, although we have every right to feel gutted at the missed opportunity. It's a time to show resolve and strength, with tremendous hope and inspiration from the events of the past 2 years. The Scottish Socialist Party has no intention of giving up on the struggle for an independent socialist Scotland, and I for one have no intention of accepting that we have to wait a generation, let alone a lifetime, as some SNP members have stated after the no vote. None of us, however talented, will change the world on our own. We need to combine. We need to learn from each other, organise and act in unison. We face formidable enemies, but we are part of a phenomenal force of people, provided we understand what is going on and then act on it. Last time out we spoke about the possibility of being committed to another war in the Middle East. Since then, Westminster, or as some prefer to call it Warmonster, have indeed voted to go to war, with the added bonus to tell us of this being a long drawn out affair, somewhere in the region of at least 3 years, perhaps longer. Now call me sceptical, but I feel like London have been itching to get involved in this war for a long time, and were clearly prepared to use any excuse to go in. Last year, David Cameron tried to get us involved in the exact same war, but on the other side. I personally organised a local anti-war activity that time, and together with similar groups all over the country, we were able to force Westminster to back down and stay out of the war. This time round they weren't to be defeated again, and so they rushed the vote through Parliament with little consultation and no chance for the public to vent their opposition. In fact, the vote was rushed through so quickly that certain details remain unclear, like what exactly we're trying to achieve, never mind how we're going to do it. We're going over there to drop bombs on people with absolutely no explanation of how that is going to improve the situation. Even more absurd is the fact that the people we are now at war with is the exact same people that last year Westminster was helping to arm and train, and even tried to join the war alongside. The whole situation is a mess, and it is a mess of London's making. This absurdity was excellently summed up by a letter writer, Mrs. Audrey Bailey. Let me read this letter to you in full, because it's fantastic. Mrs. Bailey says, and I begin quoting, "Are you confused by what is going on in the Middle East? Let me explain. We support the Iraqi government in the fight against the Islamic State. We don't like the Islamic State, but the Islamic State is supported by Saudi Arabia, who we do like. We don't like President Assad in Syria. We support the fight against him, but not the Islamic State, which is also fighting against him. We don't like Iran, but Iran supports the Iraqi government against the Islamic State. So, some of our friends support our enemies, and some of our enemies are our friends, and some of our enemies are fighting against our other enemies, who we want to lose, but we don't want our enemies who are fighting our enemies to win. If the people we want to defeat are defeated, they might be replaced by people we like even less. And all this was started by us invading a country to drive out terrorists, who weren't actually there until we went in to drive them out. Do you understand now?" End quote. And just to think, only last month we had the chance to keep ourselves out of this nonsense forever. Of course, any no voters who have been paying attention to English politics should be aware of plans that are afoot south of the border to eject Scotland from the Union. Do you still feel better together in the knowledge that your betters in London don't actually want you after all? Of course, I'm talking about UKIP, who have seen a number of their more influential members put forward the idea of an English referendum, which would see Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland kicked out of the UK. Essentially, it's an English independence referendum to dissolve the United Kingdom. Now, you might think that with UKIP being a minor party in English politics, that these are just empty threats from a party with no opportunity to put them into practice. That would be a very naive belief. Recent defections from the Tories to UKIP have shown that UKIP are on the rise south of our border, and with the Lib Dems set to be wiped out at the general election in May, there is a very real prospect of the Tories turning to UKIP to form a coalition government. Now, one thing that UKIP wants is an in-out referendum about the EU, but the Tories can't offer them that as any deal, as one of the Tories' own election promises is to hold an in-out referendum on the EU. So what will they offer UKIP in exchange for help in forming the government? It is not out of the question that UKIP will get their Scotland out English independence referendum as part of the deal. Just now, this is just speculation, of course, but it is speculation based on some uncomfortable truths. Now, I don't know about you, but I would find it eternally embarrassing if Scotland, after rejecting independence, were to find herself independent anyway as a result of a decision that we had no say in. One of the central arguments for independence was that we would always have control over the decisions that affect Scotland. And now here we are with the very real prospect of this decision being made for us by others. It goes to show the extent to which, under the current arrangements, Scotland lacks control and is instead totally at the whim of London politicians. Moving away from London and into the wider world, we are encouraged by developments in Catalonia. It's probably fair to say that the Catalans' independence movement is at least a decade ahead of ours in Scotland, which only really started in earnest 2 years ago. So by looking to Catalonia, we get a glimpse of our own future, and what we see there is a massive support for independence. Now, because of the delay between this being recorded and being aired, we're not exactly sure how recent developments will play out, but we can have an educated stab at it. Whatever happens, what we do know is that the Catalan president has officially called for the referendum to take place on November the 9th. By the time this broadcasts, we will know for sure, but the Spanish government is almost certain to refer this to the Constitutional Court in order to get the referendum deemed unconstitutional and therefore illegal. The court comprises 12 members who are all affiliated with anti-independence parties, so it seems certain that the Spanish government will get their way on this one. This is where it gets interesting for us, as if this scenario plays out as I've described, then the Catalans have two choices. They can either go ahead with the referendum anyway, or they can call early elections and vote for independence supporting candidates. Either way, the Catalan president has ensured that Catalans will get to vote on independence, despite Madrid trying to stop them. Given that the referendum will be ruled illegal then, a yes vote will be a vote for UDI, a unilateral declaration of independence. Similarly, if the Catalans instead opt for the option of early elections and elect a majority of independence supporting candidates, then this too will be seen as a vote for UDI, Unilateral Declaration of Independence. Keep that term in mind, UDI, Unilateral Declaration of Independence. It is unlikely that London will allow us another referendum anytime soon. It is, however, highly likely that there will be a yes majority in Scotland within the very near future, due to Westminster failing to honour their pre-referendum promises, the surge in yes support anyway that shows no sign of abating, and the fact that it was only the pensioners' vote that got no over the finishing line this time. UDI is being touted by some as the way to go in Scotland. The next test of the support for the Union will be in May at the general elections. The Yes campaign is in advanced talks with all the parties, groups and prominent individuals who made up the Yes movement, and it seems at least possible that we will present a united front at those elections. It will be interesting to see what share of the vote Yes could achieve. 45% is what we got in the referendum. Any more in May will show that support for independence is growing. If we get over 50%, then who knows? UDI, with the backing of a democratic majority, could be the best option. In the meantime though, we have to keep the pressure on the London parties to honour their promise to give more powers to Scotland. Importantly, we must ensure that they deliver real powers, not some poor imitation clouded in clever political language and obfuscation. Now I'm sure everyone listening will have their own ideas about what powers could be devolved to Scotland, but I want to share a few ideas with you and why I think they're important. Perhaps you could contact the show with your own ideas, either via inverclyde.radio.scot or via the local branch of the Scottish Socialist Party's Facebook page. Now my first idea is in response to the blatant bias of the BBC during the referendum. For the entire 2 years of that campaign, the BBC acted as a PR company for Westminster. It peddled their lies unchallenged, attempted to discredit the Yes campaign at every opportunity, and failed to scrutinise the No side at all. But what could we expect? The BBC answers to Westminster. I propose that the BBC should now be devolved. In other words, BBC Scotland should be answerable to Holyrood, not Westminster. Now this is not a particularly new or revolutionary idea of mine. In fact, included in the Scottish Socialist Party's manifesto is a commitment to transferring responsibility for broadcasting in Scotland to the Scottish Parliament. But allow me to focus on the BBC, as it is of course our state-owned broadcaster, and we should therefore naturally have a greater degree of control over it than we could perhaps expect to have over other private broadcasters. Someone might oppose to my idea by saying something like, Scotland can't afford its own state broadcaster, we need the rest of the UK to help fund it, and we benefit from the quality input they make to the BBC. This is just another version of the Scotland is too wee, too poor, too stupid argument. Some of you, especially if you've been following the show, will already have an idea where I'm going with this. Remember a little stat about the BBC that I like to share. The BBC takes in over £300 million per year in licence fees in Scotland, but only spends £89 million here. So in other words, Scotland can more than afford to manage our own state broadcaster. In fact, Scottish licence fee payers have been subsidising English viewers to the tune of over £200 million per year. If BBC Scotland were devolved, and the licence fees kept in Scotland to fund the devolved institution, we here in Scotland would actually have democratic control over our state broadcaster. And with an extra £200 million per year to invest in new content, we could develop the outstanding acting, writing and filmmaking talent in this country. Speaking about keeping our money in Scotland, I strongly believe that all tax revenue raised in Scotland should go to Holyrood. Now the referendum resulted in a vote to stay in the UK, which means that some powers will go to Holyrood, while some powers remain reserved to Westminster. Defence and foreign policy, for example, stay at Westminster. Under current arrangements, all of Scotland's revenue, which is vast, goes to Westminster. They then send us back a small percentage of what we raise as our budget for Holyrood. The rest is spent on our behalf by Westminster, a lot of the time on things we neither need nor want. A large part of Scotland's income is spent on illegal nuclear weapons, which the vast majority of people in Scotland don't want. Significant amounts of our income are spent on vanity projects in England, such as the London Olympics or the new high-speed rail, none of which are any value whatsoever to Scotland. Meanwhile, the Scottish Government is operating on a shrinking budget, and we are told difficult decisions and cuts await us. If Scotland's revenue were to be fully controlled by the Scottish Government, it would mean we could take care of our own funding priorities first, without having to watch as our money is wasted by London out with our control. We could use our money to protect the vulnerable members of our society. We could invest in public services and jobs which would reinvigorate communities across Scotland. As the country voted to stay in the UK, the Scottish Government would then pay Westminster its share of the defence budget and the like. This would give us the option to pay for legitimate defence costs, but refuse to pay London for its illegal weapons of mass destruction. It would mean that we could refuse to allow London to use our money to fund their vanity projects, and instead invest that money in communities like Inverclyde. Speaking about communities like Inverclyde, and my final point for this week, is that I'm delighted by the excellent news coming out of Port Glasgow that Ferguson's has secured its first contract under the new owners. Despite differences in opinion on how our economy should be structured, we here at Inverclyde Scottish Socialist Party would like to congratulate the Scottish Government on the work they have done to save the Yard. I'm amused, of course, when I remember the initial reaction of some local councillors when news broke that the Yard was in trouble. The New Labour shower printed a Save Our Yard banner and posed for photos. Meanwhile, the Scottish Government got on with the real work of actually saving the Yard. Mr McCabe told us that we need London to protect our yards. But if the Scottish Government hadn't stepped in and we had left it up to London, the Yard would have shut in August. I've been Ben Irvine. Until next time, power and peace for the people.